The first light of dawn streaked across the Montana sky as Emily Mercer guided her battered Ford pickup through the gates of Fort Morrison. The truck's once blue paint had faded to a weathered gray, its bumper held together by baling wire and sheer determination. The guard at the checkpoint glanced at her papers, then at her plain face framed by brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Ma'am, you sure you're at the right place?" he asked, handing back her credentials. Emily nodded once, her hazel eyes giving away nothing. "I'm sure." The guard shrugged and waved her through. As she pulled away, she caught his reflection in the rearview mirror already radioing ahead. She knew what he was saying. They hadn't expected someone like her. Fort Morrison housed the Advanced Military Intelligence Training Program, the most rigorous officer training in the United States military. Established in 1975 after the fall of Saigon, it was created to develop a new generation of intelligence operatives who could navigate the treacherous waters of the Cold War. The Soviet threat loomed larger than ever, and America needed eyes and ears in places where uniformed soldiers couldn't go. Emily parked her truck between two polished Jeeps, the contrast stark and immediate. She stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and shouldered a worn canvas backpack that had seen too many miles. Her olive-drab t-shirt was faded but crisp, her cargo pants well-worn but immaculate. Nothing about her screamed soldier, let alone officer. She looked like someone who might deliver mail to the base, not train within it. Across the yard, 40 men and women stood in formation. Their uniforms pressed their postures perfect. Emily walked toward them, unhurried, her gait steady and economical. Every eye turned to watch her approach, conversation dropping to whispers, then silence. "Who the hell is that?" Michael Carter muttered to the man beside him. Carter stood 6'2", with shoulders built from years of college football and a confidence honed in the officer ranks of the 82nd Airborne. His father had been a colonel, his grandfather a general. Military service ran in his blood like a covenant. Before anyone could answer, Captain Howard Marshall strode onto the parade ground, clipboard in hand. He was lean and hard, a Vietnam veteran with a perpetual scowl etched into his face. The formation snapped to attention. "At ease," Marshall barked, scanning the line. His eyes found Emily standing slightly apart from the group. "You, name and rank." "Emily Mercer, Captain," she replied, her voice calm and clear. Marshall checked his clipboard, frowning. "You're late, Mercer." "My truck broke down outside of Billings, sir. I fixed it as quickly as I could." A ripple of suppressed laughter moved through the formation. "Fixed her own truck. Like some grease monkey." Marshall's eyes narrowed. "This program doesn't tolerate excuses. Fall in." Emily took her place at the end of the line. She felt the stares but didn't acknowledge them. She'd faced worse. Much worse. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marshall addressed the group pacing before them like a caged predator. "Welcome to hell. For the next 16 weeks, you will be pushed beyond your limits. You will be broken down and rebuilt. Half of you won't make it past the first month. Another quarter will wash out before graduation." He paused, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "This isn't about who you were before. Your family names, your connections, your previous assignments. None of that matters here. What matters is what you can do, what you can endure, and what you can become." His eyes lingered on Emily for a moment longer than the others. "Dismissed to barracks. Gear inspection at 0600 tomorrow. Don't be late." As the formation dispersed, Emily felt a shoulder brush roughly against hers. Michael Carter looked down at her, his mouth twisted in a smirk. "You sure you're in the right place, farm girl?" Emily met his gaze without expression. "Quite sure." He snorted and walked away, joined by a woman with sharp features and calculating eyes. Rebecca Wilson, her name tag read. She glanced back at Emily with undisguised contempt. "Gender quota," Wilson murmured, just loud enough for Emily to hear. "They'll let anyone in these days." Emily picked up her bag and headed toward the women's barracks, ignoring the whispers that followed her. The concrete building was Spartan, rows of metal bunks, industrial lockers, and communal showers that promised no privacy. She claimed a bottom bunk in the corner, the least desirable spot, where the pipes clanked all night and the draft was coldest. Wilson entered with two other women, claiming the bunks nearest the heater. She watched Emily methodically unpacking her meager belongings. 3 sets of fatigues worn but meticulously maintained. A small leather case containing a sewing kit and basic toiletries. A folded photograph she placed carefully in her breast pocket, without looking at it. "Hey, thrift shop," Wilson called out. "Where'd you serve before this?" "The motor pool." Emily continued arranging her gear, her movements precise and economical. "Force Recon Camp Lejeune. Before that, Fort Benning." Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly. Force Recon was no joke. The Marine Corps' elite reconnaissance unit. But Emily didn't look the part. No swagger, no visible muscle, nothing that said special operations. Wilson exchanged glances with her companions. "Right," she said, unconvinced. "And I'm the Queen of England." Emily didn't respond. She finished her preparations, lay back on her bunk, and closed her eyes, hands folded across her stomach. To anyone watching, she might have been asleep. But beneath her eyelids, her eyes were moving, scanning the room, mapping exits, cataloging details. Old habits. Morning came brutally early at Fort Morrison. The instructors believed in the Soviet threat and the need for perfect soldiers to counter it. At 04:30, the lights blazed on and boots thundered through the hallways. By 0500, Emily was standing at attention beside her bunk uniform, crisp bed made with hospital corners tight enough to bounce a quarter. Captain Marshall moved through the barracks like a storm front, inspecting each area with surgical precision. When he reached Emily's bunk, he paused, searching for a flaw. Finding none, his frown deepened as if her perfection was an insult rather than a virtue. "Adequate, Mercer," he said before moving on. At 05:30, the entire class assembled on the parade ground for physical training. The Montana morning was bitter cold frost, silvering the grass. Steam rose from their bodies as they began, jumping jacks, push-ups, sit-ups, and a 5-mile run that took them up the punishing hills surrounding the base. Emily kept pace easily. Her breathing measured her strides, economical. She didn't push to the front, didn't lag behind. She simply maintained her position in the middle of the pack, seemingly without effort. Carter noticed. Running beside her, he increased his pace, expecting her to fall behind. When she matched him effortlessly, his jaw tightened. "Not bad for a grease monkey," he said between breaths, voice dripping with condescension. Emily didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. "What's wrong? Too winded to talk." Carter pressed his own breathing, becoming labored as they hit an incline. "Conserving energy," she replied, simply, her voice steady. By mile 4, Carter was struggling. Emily maintained her pace, neither slowing nor accelerating. When they crested the final hill, Carter stumbled slightly. Without breaking stride, Emily's hand shot out, steadying him just enough to prevent a fall. Carter yanked his arm away as if burned. "I don't need your help," he hissed. Emily dropped her hand and continued running, face impassive. At breakfast in the mess hall, Emily sat alone, methodically consuming a tray of powdered eggs toast and black coffee. The room buzzed with conversation bonds already forming among the trainees. She felt Wilson's eyes on her from across the room, heard the whispers, the snickers. It didn't matter. She wasn't here to make friends. A shadow fell across her tray. She looked up to see Daniel Parker, another trainee, a former Army Ranger with a square jaw and calculating eyes. "This seat taken?" he asked, though he was already sitting down. Emily shook her head once, returning to her food. "You're not what I expected," Parker said, studying her. "And what did you expect?" she asked, her voice neutral. Parker shrugged. "Someone who looks like they belong in an intelligence unit. You look like you should be fixing Jeeps somewhere." "Appearances can be deceiving." "So they say." Parker leaned closer. "Word is, you were Force Recon. That true?" Emily took a sip of her coffee, neither confirming nor denying. "Because I know guys in Force Recon," Parker continued. "Tough sons of bitches, every one of them. They don't make 'em small and quiet like you." Emily set down her mug. "Are you questioning my service record, Parker?" Something in her tone made him hesitate. For just a moment, her eyes met his, and what he saw there made him lean back involuntarily. "Just making conversation," he said, his smirk returning. "No offense meant." "None taken." She finished her coffee and stood. "Excuse me." As she walked away, Parker called after her, "See you at the range, Mercer. Hope you can shoot better than you can socialize." The firing range at Fort Morrison was state-of-the-art, designed to simulate combat conditions rather than traditional marksmanship. The morning's exercise involved moving through a course with multiple target stations, engaging enemies, while distinguishing from civilians, all under simulated stress conditions, including smoke noise and instructors shouting contradictory commands. Each trainee was issued an M16A1, the standard service rifle that had seen America through the jungles of Vietnam. The weapon was a controversial choice. Many soldiers had reported jamming issues in muddy conditions, but it remained the backbone of the infantry. Its lightweight design and 5.56mm rounds made it manageable for extended operations, though at the cost of stopping power compared to the older M14. Emily checked her weapon methodically. Bolt chamber magazine sights. Her hands moved with practiced precision, familiar with every curve and mechanism of the rifle. This particular M16 had seen better days. The stock was worn smooth, the barrel showed signs of heavy use, and the sights were slightly misaligned. Captain Marshall watched her inspection with narrowed eyes. "Problem with your weapon, Mercer?" "No, sir," she replied, not looking up. "Just getting acquainted." When her turn came to run the course, Emily moved with fluid efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She flowed from cover to cover, dropped to prone position when necessary, and engaged targets with mechanical precision. Her shots clustered tightly, 2 to the center mass of each hostile target, perfect trigger discipline on the civilian silhouettes. At the final station, a target pivoted unexpectedly from behind a barrier. A child holding a weapon. In the split second allowed for decision-making, Emily's shot struck the silhouette's arm, disabling without killing. When she emerged from the course, the rangemaster checked her score with evident surprise. 42 targets engaged, 42 hits, 0 civilian casualties, optimal ammunition, conservation. Despite the misaligned sights, she had compensated perfectly. Carter ran the course next, his movements aggressive and showy. He hit 39 targets, but also struck 2 civilians. When he saw Emily's score posted on the board, his face darkened. "Beginner's luck," he muttered to Wilson, who had done nearly as well as Emily. Wilson's eyes narrowed. "Or she's not what she seems." The afternoon brought classroom instruction, intelligence-gathering methodologies, threat assessment protocols, and the psychology of interrogation. The instructor, Major Lawrence Bennett, was a former CIA analyst, with a hawkish view of Soviet intentions. "The Russians aren't just our military adversaries," he explained, pacing before a map showing Soviet spheres of influence. "They're engaged in an ideological war for the soul of humanity. Their agents are embedded in governments worldwide. Their influence operations are sophisticated and far-reaching." Emily sat near the back, taking minimal notes. Bennett noticed. "Mercer," he called suddenly, "you seem unimpressed by the Soviet threat. Perhaps you'd like to share your assessment of their capabilities in Eastern Europe." Without hesitation, Emily rose. "The Warsaw Pact nations represent a formidable conventional force with approximately 201 divisions compared to NATO's 133. Their T-62 and T-72 tanks outnumber our M-60s by nearly 3-to-1. However, their command structure suffers from rigid centralization, creating vulnerabilities that can be exploited through asymmetric operations." She paused, then continued, her voice steady and authoritative. "Their most significant advantage lies not in military hardware, but in human intelligence assets. The KGB and GRU have successfully penetrated multiple NATO security apparatuses. The defection of James Angleton's protégé last year compromised at least 17 field operations in East Germany alone." The room had gone silent. Bennett stared at her, his expression unreadable. "That information about the Angleton case isn't in the course materials," he said slowly. "In fact, it's classified." Emily met his gaze. "Yes, sir. See me after class, Mercer." When the session ended, Emily approached Bennett's desk. He was studying her file, his brow furrowed. "Your record is interesting," he said without looking up. "Extensive redactions, minimal personal information. Your previous commanding officer's assessments are either missing or classified above my clearance level." He closed the folder and finally met her eyes. "Who are you really, Captain Mercer?" "Just a soldier, sir." Bennett leaned back in his chair. "I've been teaching this course for 3 years. I know every major intelligence operation run in Eastern Europe since 1970. Yet I've never heard of you." "That would suggest the system is working as designed, wouldn't it, sir?" A ghost of a smile crossed Bennett's face. "Watch yourself, Mercer. Carter and his crowd don't appreciate mysteries, and they don't fight fair." "Noted, sir." The following days fell into a grueling rhythm. Pre-dawn physical training, tactical exercises, classroom instruction, and evening study sessions that often stretched past midnight. The program was designed to identify weaknesses, to push boundaries until they broke. Each day, more trainees washed out, unable to meet the punishing standards. Emily endured. She never excelled ostentatiously, never failed spectacularly. She simply persisted, her performance consistent and unremarkable, except in moments when true expertise couldn't be hidden. During a field exercise in land navigation, the trainees were dropped in wilderness terrain with minimal equipment and ordered to reach designated coordinates within 6 hours. A storm moved in, bringing driving rain and near-zero visibility. Several teams became disoriented, including Carter's. Emily navigated the treacherous conditions with uncanny precision, reaching the rally point 2 hours ahead of schedule. When Carter's team finally arrived, soaked and miserable, he found her calmly waiting under an improvised shelter, a small fire burning despite the wet conditions. "How the hell did you manage that?" he demanded, gesturing to the fire. Emily shrugged. "Pine resin burns even when wet. Old trick." Carter's eyes narrowed. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Making us look bad." "I'm just doing my job," she replied evenly. "Your job?" he scoffed. "What exactly is your job, Mercer? Nobody knows where you came from. Nobody knows how someone like you got into a program like this." Emily stoked the fire, her face illuminated by the dancing flames. Perhaps you should focus less on me and more on your own performance, Carter. You missed the rally point by nearly a kilometer. His face flushed with anger. This isn't over, he muttered, turning away. That night in the barracks, Emily felt the atmosphere shift. The other women were no longer simply dismissive. Now there was active hostility. Wilson sat on her bunk watching Emily with cold calculation. "You think you're special," Wilson said, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "But we've all seen your type before, women who sleep their way to advancement." Emily continued preparing her gear for the next day's exercise, her movements unhurried. "Nothing to say," Wilson pressed. "No denial, no righteous indignation." "Would it change your mind if I did?" Emily asked without looking up. Wilson laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "My father fought in Korea. My brother died in Vietnam. I earned my place here through sacrifice and service. What did you sacrifice, Mercer? Besides your dignity?" Emily finally looked up, her eyes meeting Wilson's. For a brief moment, something flickered in their depths, a shadow of experiences too dark to name. Then it was gone, her expression once again impassive. "Good night, Wilson," she said quietly, turning away. Week 3 brought the dreaded SEER training: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. Normally reserved for special operations forces and pilots, this condensed version was designed to prepare intelligence officers for worst-case scenarios behind enemy lines. The trainees were transported to a remote training facility in the mountains, a mock prisoner-of-war camp, complete with guard towers, barbed wire, and instructors playing the role of hostile captors. They were processed in, stripped of personal items, issued prisoner uniforms, and subjected to disorientation techniques, including sleep deprivation and loud continuous noise. Emily moved through the intake procedures mechanically, her face betraying nothing as male guards conducted invasive searches and hurled verbal abuse. When one guard grabbed her roughly by the arm, she didn't resist, didn't flinch. Her eyes remained fixed on the middle distance, seeing something far beyond the present moment. The trainees were separated into isolation cells, subjected to hours of interrogation. The instructors used psychological tactics rather than physical torture, though the line sometimes blurred. Stress positions, temperature manipulation, and targeted psychological pressure were all part of the program. On the third day, Carter broke. After 36 hours without sleep, he gave up key information during a mock interrogation. When he was returned to the common area where the prisoners were periodically gathered, his face was ashen, his confidence shattered. Emily had been placed in a punishment cell for insubordination, refusing to reveal even basic biographical information to her interrogators. She was brought back to the common area on the 4th day, moving stiffly from hours spent in a stress position, but her eyes were clear and focused. Parker watched her with growing curiosity. "How are you still functioning?" he whispered when the guards weren't looking. "They've had you in the box for 20 hours." Emily took a small sip from the metallic-tasting water they'd been provided. "Focus on your breathing. Compartmentalize the pain, find a memory, and live in it." Parker studied her face, really seeing her for the first time. Beneath the plain features and unassuming demeanor was something forged in fire, a strength that didn't come from physical size or institutional power. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. Before she could answer, the guards returned, separating them for another round of interrogations. The breaking point came during the final exercise, a simulated escape and evasion scenario. The trainees, now reduced to 20 from the original 40, were transported to a new facility. During the move, they were given an opportunity to escape and evade capture in the surrounding wilderness for 48 hours. They were divided into teams of 4. Emily found herself grouped with Carter, Wilson, and Parker. the three people in the program who had shown her the most hostility. It was no coincidence. The instructors deliberately created friction to test how teams performed under stress. "Great," Carter muttered when the assignments were announced. "We get the janitor." Emily ignored the jab, focusing instead on memorizing the terrain map they were shown briefly before the exercise began. When they were loaded into transport vehicles with bags over their heads, she was already formulating a plan. The escape opportunity came when the convoy stopped at a checkpoint. In the confusion of a staged argument between guards, the trainees were meant to slip away. Carter immediately took charge, leading their group toward the tree line at a reckless pace that left them exposed. "We need to move northeast," he insisted once they reached cover. "There's an extraction point marked on the map." "That's a trap," Emily said quietly. "It's too obvious." Carter rounded on her. "No one asked for your opinion." "She's right," Parker interjected. "It makes no sense to put an extraction point where they showed us on the map. They're testing whether we can think independently." Wilson looked between them, then at the darkening sky. "We need to make a decision. They'll have search parties out soon." "We go south," Emily said with quiet authority. "The terrain is more difficult, but it provides better cover. There's a river valley that will mask our heat signatures from infrared tracking." "And how the hell would you know about infrared tracking?" Carter demanded. Emily met his gaze steadily. "Because that's what I would do if I were hunting escaped prisoners." Something in her tone silenced further argument. They moved south, Emily naturally taking point, leading them through dense underbrush and across rocky terrain that left minimal tracks. Night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that made their teeth chatter. "We need shelter," Wilson said, hugging herself for warmth. Emily nodded. "There's a formation of rocks ahead that should provide cover from three sides. We can rest there until dawn." The makeshift shelter was cramped but defensible. Emily organized a watch rotation, taking the first shift herself. As the others tried to sleep, she sat at the entrance, eyes scanning the darkness, ears attuned to the forest sounds. Parker couldn't sleep. He watched Emily from where he lay, noting how she periodically checked sight lines, how her hand occasionally drifted to her ankle, where in a real situation, a weapon might be concealed. "You've done this before," he said softly, not wanting to wake the others. "For real, I mean." Emily didn't turn around. "Get some rest, Parker. Your watch is next." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's not." Dawn brought new challenges. Aircraft sounds overhead indicated the search had intensified. Emily led them through a stream to mask their scent from tracking dogs, then through a series of ravines that kept them hidden from aerial observation. By midday, exhaustion and hunger were taking their toll. Carter's earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by simmering resentment. When Emily suggested they split up temporarily to confuse pursuers, he saw an opportunity. "Fine," he said. "Wilson and I will circle west. You and Parker go east. We'll rendezvous at the lightning-struck pine we passed an hour ago." Emily nodded, though something in Carter's manner put her on alert. She and Parker headed east, moving carefully through increasingly rocky terrain. "He's planning something," Parker said once they were alone. "He's had it in for you since day one." "I know," Emily replied. "But right now, surviving this exercise is more important than Carter's ego." They continued in silence for several minutes before Parker spoke again. "Why does he hate you so much? What did you do to him?" Emily paused, considering how to answer. "I represent something he doesn't understand. People fear what they don't understand." "And what's that?" "Someone who succeeds without needing to prove themselves at every turn." The ambush came as they were navigating a narrow pass between two rock formations. Carter and Wilson had doubled back, positioning themselves on higher ground. As Emily and Parker entered the pass, Carter shoved a boulder down the slope. Emily heard it before she saw it. The subtle scrape of stone against stone. She reacted instinctively, shoving Parker clear of the path. The boulder crashed down, missing them both, but sending a shower of smaller rocks cascading around them. Emily lost her footing, tumbling several feet down a steep incline before catching herself against a tree. Her shirt tore, exposing her back, as she struggled to regain her balance. Parker scrambled down to help her, then froze, his eyes fixed on what the torn fabric had revealed. Across her left shoulder blade was a tattoo, a black panther in mid-leap poised above a shattered compass. The design was stark against her skin, the detail extraordinary. "Holy shit," Parker whispered. "You're one of them." Emily pulled the fabric, closed her eyes suddenly hard. "Help me up." Above them, Carter and Wilson appeared at the edge of the incline, their expressions shifting from triumph to confusion at seeing both Emily and Parker alive. "It was an accident," Carter called down, his voice unconvincing. "Rock must have come loose." Parker ignored him, still staring at Emily. "Phantom Echo," he said, the name barely audible. "My uncle told me stories, said they were ghosts, that they didn't exist in any official capacity." "Your uncle talks too much," Emily replied tersely, getting to her feet. Before Parker could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." All four trainees turned to see Colonel Frank Reynolds standing at the top of the ridge, his weathered face set in grim lines. Reynolds was the commanding officer of Fort Morrison, a legendary figure in military intelligence circles who rarely interacted directly with trainees. His eyes were fixed on Emily, specifically on the torn section of her shirt that partially revealed the tattoo. His expression changed from anger to shock, then to something approaching reverence. "Captain Mercer," he said, his voice different now. "My apologies for the interruption." Emily straightened, meeting his gaze. "No apology necessary, Colonel." Reynolds turned to Carter and Wilson, his previous deference replaced by cold fury. "You two, report to Captain Marshall immediately. This exercise is over." As Carter and Wilson retreated, visibly confused by the colonel's reaction, Reynolds approached Emily. He stopped a respectful distance away, then did something that left Parker speechless. He saluted her, a gesture of profound respect, from a superior officer to a subordinate. "It's an honor," Reynolds said quietly. "Shadow spoke highly of you." Emily returned the salute, her posture shifting subtly. For the first time since arriving at Fort Morrison, she stood with her full presence revealed, no longer the unassuming figure blending into the background, but a soldier of extraordinary capability and experience. "The honor is mine, Colonel," she replied. "He spoke highly of you as well." Reynolds nodded, then turned to Parker, who was watching the exchange with undisguised confusion. "Lieutenant Parker, what you've witnessed today is classified. Do you understand?" Parker swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir." "Good." Reynolds gestured toward a path leading back to the base. "Shall we, Captain Mercer? I believe we have matters to discuss." As they walked, Parker fell in step beside Emily, his voice low. "Who are you really?" Emily glanced at him, then at the Montana mountains surrounding them. For a moment, her eyes seemed to look beyond the present to places and times Parker couldn't imagine. "Someone who learned the hard way that appearances are the best camouflage," she finally answered, "and that the quietest warriors are often the most effective." Ahead of them, the training facility came into view, its buildings stark against the landscape. And standing at the main gate, his posture unmistakable even at a distance, was a man whose presence changed the very air around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair cut military short, he wore the stars of a general on his uniform. Emily's steps faltered for just a moment before she continued forward, her face once again an unreadable mask. "That's General Robert Mercer," Parker said, his voice tinged with awe. "Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command. What's he doing here?" Emily didn't answer. But as they drew closer, the general's eyes found hers across the distance, and something passed between them. A silent communication born of shared experiences and deeper connections. "He's waiting for you," Reynolds said quietly. "Yes," Emily replied. "He always does." The debriefing room at Fort Morrison was a windowless concrete box designed to contain secrets. Emily sat across from Colonel Reynolds, a steel table between them, the harsh fluorescent light casting shadows across their faces. General Robert Mercer stood by the door, his presence filling the small space with quiet authority. "Phantom Echo," Reynolds said, breaking the silence. "I thought the unit was deactivated after Saigon fell." Emily's face remained impassive. "Officially, it was." "And unofficially," Reynolds pressed. Colonel General Mercer interjected, his deep voice resonating in the confined space. "Some questions are better left unasked." Reynolds nodded, understanding the boundaries. He slid a folder across the table to Emily, her personnel file, the cover stamped with classification markings that exceeded his own security clearance. "Your actual service record," he said. "The unredacted version arrived this morning, hand-delivered by the general himself." Emily didn't touch the folder. "Then you know why I'm here." "I know that you're not just another trainee." Reynolds leaned forward, his weathered face etched with a mix of respect and concern. "What I don't understand is why someone with your qualifications would submit to this program at all, let alone tolerate the treatment you've received." Emily's eyes met the general's for a brief moment before returning to Reynolds. "Assessment and recruitment." Understanding dawned on Reynolds's face. "You're evaluating my people." "Some of them," she confirmed. "Intelligence suggests Soviet counterintelligence has been placing sleeper agents in military training programs. We needed to observe from within." Reynolds absorbed this, his expression darkening. "And have you found what you're looking for?" "Not yet," Emily replied. "But we're getting closer." The colonel glanced at General Mercer, who gave a barely perceptible nod. "Whatever resources you need, Captain Mercer, they're yours. But there's the matter of Carter and Wilson. Their actions today were exactly what we needed," Emily interrupted. "Pressure reveals character. Let them think they've won a small victory. It will make them careless." Reynolds nodded slowly. "As you wish." He stood gathering the file. "There's one more thing. Your tattoo. The Black Panther is known only to a handful of people with the highest clearances. If Parker speaks about what he saw, he won't," Emily said with quiet certainty. After Reynolds left the room, fell into silence. Emily finally looked fully at General Mercer, her professional mask softening almost imperceptibly. "Robert," she said, her voice lower now, more intimate. "Emily." He moved to the chair Reynolds had vacated, his movements precise despite his imposing frame. Up close, the lines around his eyes were deeper than when she'd last seen him. "You're taking unnecessary risks. We've had this conversation before, and we'll keep having it until you stop being so damn stubborn." Despite his words, there was no real anger in his voice, only concern wrapped in years of shared history. Emily's lips curved in the barest suggestion of a smile. "It's why you married me." The tension in Mercer's shoulders eased slightly. He reached across the table, his large hand covering hers. His thumb brushed over the simple gold band on her finger, the only personal item she hadn't stored away upon arrival. "James made contact," he said, shifting to business. 2 days ago. Emily's expression changed, a flicker of something unreadable passing across her features. "Where?" "Berlin, East Tier." Mercer's jaw tightened. He crossed through Checkpoint Charlie using credentials that shouldn't exist anymore. Left a message at the dead drop on Frankfurter Allee. What did it say? She wasn't the last, that's all. Emily withdrew her hand, her posture straightening. "He's talking about Natalia Orlova, the defector from the Leningrad residentura." Mercer nodded. "The one who claimed there were multiple moles in our intelligence apparatus. The one who was found with her throat cut 3 days after debriefing." "James trained her," Emily said quietly, before he disappeared. "Phantom Echo always operated outside normal chains of command," Mercer said, his tone careful. "Even I never had full visibility into your operations. But whatever Shadow is doing now, he's doing it without authorization." Emily stood pacing the small room with controlled energy. He wouldn't break protocol without reason. If he's surfaced now after 3 years of silence, it means something critical has changed. "Or he's compromised," Mercer countered. "The Soviets would love nothing more than to capture the legendary Shadow Blackwood. To turn him." Emily stopped, fixing him with a hard stare. "He would die before turning." "Everyone breaks eventually, Emily. Even the best." "Not him." Her voice held absolute conviction. "And not Mir." Mercer sighed, running a hand over his face. "That's what I'm afraid of." The tension between them was broken by a sharp knock at the door. Captain Marshall entered without waiting for a response, his face tight with barely contained anger. He addressed Mercer deliberately, ignoring Emily. "Carter and Wilson are claiming Mercer sabotaged the exercise. They're demanding a formal review."